Hi, I'm Simon Hartley.
And I'm Helen Gilmartin.
Welcome back to Pep Talks. Today we're joined by Phil Gold. Helen, how do you know Phil?
So recently, LinkedIn, probably a day or two after COVID-19 had really kind of sweeps the UK, had posted out this, they were talking about remote working and setting yourself up and your teams for success. And one of the videos, they had a selection of videos were really helpful, but one of the videos that I tapped into, the first one I went to was Managing Virtual Teams by Phil Gold. So I thought I really need to talk to this guy, actually. This is important. So Phil, I messaged him a couple of times and he came back and we ended up having a phone conversation, and Phil graciously agreed to come on Pep Talks because I think this is a topic on all of our agenda at the moment, and one that we felt was worth addressing.
Absolutely. I mean, lots of teams are now working remotely and lots of managers are challenged to manage a team that's now working remotely. Phil, what are you seeing? What are the major challenges that people are facing?
Well, I think the biggest theme that I've heard, the first question out of everybody's mouth is, how do I manage a team where I'm no longer around them? You know, I can't see them. I don't know what they're doing. And this has been kind of a difficult shift for people because they're used to that immediate proximity. But it's kind of the harbinger of a real paradigm shift in management and in teams and in business overall. And this is something that I think has been coming for a long time. You know, I personally, I worked remote at least part-time since the mid 2000s. You know, probably around 2009, maybe 2010. I was part of a team that brought enterprise social to a Fortune 500 company whose name I shall not mention. But because of this, we all of a sudden had all these cloud capabilities, which then enabled remote working capabilities. And to sort of prove the point, since I was an advocate and supposed to be an advocate for this, I started working at home and found out that it was wonderful. But for people who haven't done this, it's very different. It's very strange. And for managers particularly, because most managers are still managing by attendance rather than production. And they're used to seeing those butts in seats, and those butts are no longer there. They're off on their own seats. So they're struggling a little bit with, how do they know that work is happening? How do they know things are being accomplished? And the first rule that I guess I have for managers now managing remotely, rule number one: let go. You have to just let go of this. You can't hang on to the idea of you need to tightly corral and control your people. We've gone beyond control and command. What you need to be thinking about is production, and you need to be managing the production. You need each team, each organization. Now, this is going to be very, very different for each organization, but you've all got work that you need to get done. You should be able to quantify that work. You should be able to say, okay, these are the things that we need to accomplish as a team. Once you know what those are, then you can start breaking down, well, who on the team is responsible for each one of these. It's a little bit more work than a lot of managers have done. I'm always a little bit surprised when I walk into a business and I'm talking to some leader or some manager, and they're not really that clear on the work that their team does. They kind of know what the goal is. Well, they have a big picture of the goal at the end of the day, but the steps to get there, they've never really concerned themselves with that. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. You really do need to know what those steps are, at least in broad strokes. You don't have to be able to do everything. As a leader, you don't have to be able to do every task, but you really ought to know what those tasks are, because that's the work that your people are doing, and that's the metrics that you're going to use to measure whether that work is being done.
Mm.
Once you've kind of established that base to work from, then you need to really start getting your team involved in coming up with the plan for how the work's going to get accomplished, how much work is going to get accomplished. What are the trade-offs, the handoffs going to be? So I'm a very strong advocate of putting together a team working agreement. The people who are doing the work, the ones who know what's involved in getting that work done, they need to make agreements as a team about who's doing each little spot, how the handoffs work, who can cover for who, what your standard service level agreement is for how long things are going to take. And the other thing that the team needs to do is establish how they are going to be reachable by other people on the team. At what time are they going to be able to be reached? What method of communication tool should you use to reach them for different things? Like if this is, you just need to pass something over to me, just pass it over in the system. If you need to ask me a question, then just use the chat or the message tool that we have. If it's an emergency, call me and I'll answer the phone. But you're kind of setting up the triage level so that people know how to react to different circumstances. Now, the manager needs to be a part of this conversation, but I really think that the team should lead building the team rules. Once they're built, it's the manager's responsibility to hold everybody's toes to the fire and make sure that they follow
Yeah,
them.
sure.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of become the manager's biggest role now, is making sure that the team is living up to the commitments that they've made as a team.
Yeah. Right at the top there, really interestingly, you said that the sort of number one challenge is letting go. Now, this has got a sort of a mental, emotional dimension to it, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the biggest challenge with letting go, and how do you help managers get past that need for control?
Well, I've heard some very frighteningly amusing or amusingly frightening stories over the past week about different organizations and how they're dealing with their employees being remote. There's the organization that demands that the employees have their video cameras on at all times while they're working, so the manager can sort of circle around and make sure that everybody is actually sitting in front of their computer. These people have trust issues. Um, if they don't trust their employees to that level, then they probably should have done something about those employees earlier, or something about the manager. That kind of big brother spy eye in the sky thing is just not going to work. That's one of the things you have to let go of. You don't need to control where your people are, when they are. What you need to control, what you need to focus on, is that production, is the results. We need this much work done during this period of time. As long as that work gets done, we're good. We're fine. We don't have to worry about where people are sitting, or whether they put clothes on today. I mean, we only see each other from the waist up these days anyways, so who the heck knows what's going on. That was funny story number one. Funny story number two that I've heard, big company, they have twice a day status update calls with 180 managers on the line, and the person in charge of the COVID response program will give them a 15-minute update, which is usually, well, we have nothing new to say since the last time we talked to you. But 180 managers have to drop everything they're doing twice a day to join this conversation that is a waste of time conversation. That's another point of letting go. We need to communicate, but oversharing to that drastic extent is not doing anybody any good. And it's not making people feel safer, and it's not making people feel more confident. It's wasting people's time. So that one, let go of that. You don't have to have that constant stuff. If I see another email from some company that I did business with 15 years ago telling me what their response to COVID-19 is, I think I'll scream. We've got it. We understand it. You know, we all see it now. You don't have to tell me. I assume you're doing the right thing. If you're not doing the right thing, you can tell me about it, and then I'll choose not to do business with you later. But at this point, I think we have to assume that everybody knows what's going on, and there's a lot of news. If your company makes a decision that you're going to close your office or reopen part of your office or open one of your plants or close another plant, great. Communicate that, especially to the people who are affected. Make it sort of generally available to other people. We don't all have to know everything about everything. It's just not important.
Yeah. Bill, I think people, like, the reason they're in locations a lot of the time is they like to feel a sense of belonging. That's where they feel safe and happy. And when they're safe and happy, they feel more productive, or they are more productive. So in this, working environment where you're working remote, is it important to have, I've heard people talk about virtual coffee mornings, or, is that important to create a space where it's an unscheduled conversation, that it's not always a meeting, and it can be a catch up and finding out a little bit about what they're doing during the day, nothing perhaps with work, but perhaps something around self-learning or what they're going out for a walk or whatever it is that important?
So I think it very much depends on the team dynamic and the culture of the company. In some cases, I think it's critical. I mean, these are people who are so used to being in each other's pockets, and they feel a little bit lost without that immediate contact. So yeah, if it can grow organically, it's better. But if someone wants to organize, hey, we're going to have a 15-minute virtual stand around the water cooler thing, and you can all check in, and we'll all be on camera, and we can all see each other, and I think if your team is going to be helped by that, then yes, absolutely, you should do it, especially now. This is still new days for a lot of people. But one thing that I want to point out, virtual work has been happening for a while, and pretty much every single study that has been done has shown that remote workers are usually much more productive than workers in offices. And this may sound very counterintuitive to people, but remote workers on the average have been happier, more engaged, and more productive. So for people who are new to this and are all really scared about it, great. I acknowledge that this is the new thing, and you're going to have to learn to adapt to it, and there's going to be a transition period. But the good news is when you adapt and when you are starting to feel comfortable with this, you are going to find that you are happier. You are going to find that you are less stressed. You are going to find that you are basically better off. Remote work gives a lot of flexibility to employees. Um, I mentioned schedule before as one of the things that managers can't really focus on too much. We're when we are able to work at our own place and time, that place and time may vary for people because of a lot of different things. People's individual living circumstances can be very, very different. And the stuff that you didn't have to worry about when they came into the office, you have to worry about now, or they have to worry about, and it has to be taken into consideration. People with kids, okay? When everyone was coming into the office, when the schools were open, when the daycare centers were open, fine, that was all handled. It was all sorted. We didn't have to worry about it. The kids were where they needed to be. The employees were where they needed to be. Guess what? Now the kids are in the house and they're in the same house that the employees are in, which means that some of the energy needs to be directed towards those kids or directed towards those pets or directed towards those elderly parents who they are now caring for. So people are going to need to be flexible about the time that they're spending sitting down doing their work. As long as they accomplish their work for the day, it doesn't matter what time it happens. What matters is if they've made commitments to their team member that they're going to be available at X time. They need to be available at X time unless there is some kind of an emergency. But, if you want to wake up at 7 instead of 5:30 and, get to your computer at 7:30, but you're still in your bathrobe and you've got your first cup of coffee in your hand, and then you take a break at 10:30 and go and do your exercises for a while, and then you sit and decompress for a bit and come back at lunchtime and work for a little longer and maybe work a little longer into the evening because that's what works for you now. That's great. Being able to work at your own schedule, workers, this is fantastic. You will find yourselves much, much, much more relaxed as time goes on. Now, still, I'm one of those introverted, extroverted kind of people. So I'm happy not being around people, but I'm not happy not talking to people. So I do a lot of web calls just with friends, and I have established relationships and built relationships over the years virtually with people all over the world. So the other benefit of getting into sort of the remote mindset is your worldview, your possible level of connection, although it may not be physical connection face to face, it's enormous global connection possibilities. And this is still pretty immediate. I mean, I can see you guys. I can see, heads shaking, and I can see smiles, and this is a connection. This can be a very, very strong connection. It's kind of how much are you willing to put into it?
Yeah.
I think it's very natural.
Yeah. Can I share a thought with you, which I had with some clients of mine who were senior leaders in a business, in a very large business, and they were at the very early stages of leading their team remotely. One of them said, remote leadership isn't really a thing. This is just leadership. This is good leadership we're talking about here. And team working, it's not new stuff. And we were talking about the same principles apply. You just might have to tweak the application. The other reflection that I had with them is that you can probably get away with not doing some of this stuff well when you're in the same space, when you're in the same office. But when people are working remotely, you start to see the cracks a lot. So if people aren't engaged when they're at home, it's not an issue of proximity or the fact that they're remote. It's a motivational issue you've got, and you need to work out how to motivate and engage people properly. That's your actual issue. Does that resonate with you? Is that what you also see?
Absolutely, 100%. There's no secret sauce for working remotely that doesn't apply for good work principles overall. And as I said earlier, I mean, if you need to see your employees sitting in their chair because you don't trust them, you had a problem to begin with. I mean, that's not a remote problem. You got a problem.
Yeah.
If your employees are not motivated, what did you do wrong? Because you did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You either hired the wrong people, or you've been communicating with them incorrectly. You've been interacting with them incorrectly. That's not a healthy relationship if people are not motivated, if they're not engaged. So
yeah.
This unexpected benefit of our current situation is you're going to find out if you had problems with your business real fast.
Yeah. I describe it to them by saying, they might be hairline cracks if you're in the same office, but if you take it remotely, they're all of a sudden they're chasms, and you get to see them in a more stark form. But you're right. As far as I can see, that's one of the real opportunities here to really start understanding your leadership and your team working.
Yeah, and I think business culture is in transition at the moment, and I think we've been catapulted into it. So for many teams, and obviously we always have calls with global partners, and that's fine. Now, I am a cameras on person because I like to see people's facial expression and their body language. When you're talking to them at a meeting or you're trying to get through some items, I always feel that works for me. But different things will work depending on the meeting, I presume, Phil. And, if you're doing a virtual board meeting like we were talking about the other day, taking regular breaks as you would if you were actually all sitting around a table. I think things like that, we just have to get used to doing them and making sure that when we are moving it on to video conferencing, we're also thinking as if we are together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Phil, just before we wrap up, what are the major opportunities that you see within this experience now, where as people are moving remotely? What are the major opportunities that you can see, which might pervade well beyond the lockdowns and the restrictions sort of releasing?
Well, I think that one of the things that I want to stress to people is this is, in fact, the new reality, and it's never going to go back to the way it was completely. Working virtually, as I said before, this was an evolution that was already occurring. The current health crisis has accelerated it, but it was something that was always going to happen, and we're never going back to the old way. When we're all safe to intermingle again, employees are going to expect to be able to work remote. When you're hiring, when you're creating a new position, you should be designing that position so that it can be a remote position. You will increase your pool of candidates, which makes it much more likely that you'll get the right person. You will reduce your expenses because having technology for people to use to do remote work is a lot cheaper than real estate for people to sit on. I think what we're going to see is the big showplace campuses that companies have. Those are going to shrink because they won't be as necessary. Companies are going to be able to save a lot of money by having virtual workers, and but we're going to have to start thinking a little bit more when we're hiring people. Okay, what is the virtual kit? What is the required technology? What's the required connectivity that they're going to have? What is the company going to pay for? What is the employee going to pay for? So we're going remote. Expect to go remote. Expect much, much, much more work to be done remote. Expect many more employees to be working remote. As a team leader, I would absolutely get a regular team meeting on the calendar. And by regular, I don't mean every day. Maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, depends on the team, depends on the culture, depends on the company. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. I would absolutely, as a manager, expect that I would be having a conversation with each person on my team at least once a week. I would get it on the calendar, and I would make that my absolute number one priority. I get to moan about a pet peeve for a second. Managers who schedule one-on-one meetings with their employees and then cancel them. That is bad management, people. Don't ever, ever do that unless it's an emergency. I personally know of people whose managers have a recurring calendar thing for a one-on-one meeting, and every week it gets canceled or rescheduled. That is a manager showing that their employee doesn't matter to them, that other things are just much more important. Don't do that. The relationships between managers and employees going forward, they're going to be a little bit remote from each other, granted, but they have to be much stronger and much more committed, especially on the manager's side. Otherwise people will drift apart. This is the other responsibility of the manager. Responsibility number one, making sure that the work that's supposed to get done gets done when it's supposed to get done. And number two, keeping the team together as a team and making sure that the people have what they need to be the productive worker that you want them to be.
Yeah, super. And I think, Helen, you'll probably be seeing the same. I think a lot of people are starting to realize that this is going to be the new normal. This is the new future. And actually, we could use this as a real opportunity to get our heads around remote working, but also how to build stronger leadership and stronger teams, because I think it will serve everybody in the future. Absolutely. Guys, thank you very, very much. Phil, thank you very much for joining us. Helen, thank you very, very much. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Pep Talks.
Thank you.